Before we begin, this episode will contain spoilers. Viewer discretion is advised.
Where are you going?
I'm not spending my final hours with you two miserable old shits.
Hello everybody, welcome to Watch Mojo. Today we are talking Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 2.
A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms.
With young Stannis. All right, let's get right into it. What were your overall impressions of this episode?
This was another setup episode. However, it was a fantastic setup episode. We got to spend more time with our favorite characters. It felt like they had more time to breathe and interact. It also felt like a farewell episode for a lot of these characters, although we're not sure which.
Yeah, I definitely thought that this was an episode of Game of Thrones, if you know what I mean. I felt like the last one had kind of embraced the meme culture and the Marvel-isms, so to speak.
There was a lot of one-line clips.
Yeah, so it was kind of like more of a funny, lighthearted episode. Although I did find this one lighthearted, I did feel it felt more authentic to the series. You know, the interesting conversations, etc. So I really liked this episode.
It was a good setup.
Yeah, and I think that it kind of forced us to say farewell to a lot of our characters, so we don't really know who we're gonna lose.
It did a great job of foreshadowing the deaths of essentially all of the characters, leaving us uncertain which are actually gonna die.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So let's talk about the new title sequence.
So of course, Season 8 has a new title sequence. We have a lot of new content. We have the breach in the wall, the interiors at Winterfell and King's Landing. We also have new images on those rotating bands. We see Viserion breaking the wall. We see the Red Wedding, and we see 4 dragons following a shooting star. We also have a series of blue tiles that are tracking the White Walkers' progress. In episode 1, they were just arriving at the last hearth, but now they've surrounded the last hearth and they're creeping towards Winterfell.
Yeah, I think that this is just such a testament to the attention to detail of this show. I love the new title sequence. I love the blue tiles like creeping towards Winterfell. It's just like totally freaking me out. Let's talk a bit about one of the central themes in this episode, which is Dany and Jaime. So their sort of trial at the beginning of this episode.
I understand the need for drama and tension between them, but I have to admit, I didn't really understand why Daenerys was quite so mad. I mean, she knows that her dad was a psychopath. She knows that Jaime killed him to stop him killing thousands and thousands of other people. We've kind of been there, done that. She's acknowledged that, yeah, I know what my dad was, blah, blah, blah. I thought she's back on that kind of self-righteous train, and personally, I found it a relief when she stepped off for a moment to try to talk to Sansa and extend the olive branch.
Yeah, I think the Jaime, trial felt kind of like a non-issue for us. Like we said in the last episode, Jaime has really redeemed himself as a character, and we're kind of forced to relive all of his shortcomings. I think they just wanted to kind of address the fact that he had wronged so many people who were sitting in that room, Bran included. But like we said, Bran doesn't care. They all have bigger fish to fry. I feel like this was just kind of a formality getting over, past burns. But I think that the real kind of tension in this episode was between Dany and Sansa.
For sure, yeah. So on Ser Jorah's advice, Daenerys actually tried to make peace with Sansa, and for a little while it seemed like it was going well. You know, they had a moment, they joked about Jon. Daenerys made a joke about Jon not being as tall as she imagined her future beau would be. But it all went south pretty quickly and got chilly really fast when the issue of the throne was brought up.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people were looking forward to this kind of being resolved to strong female characters. I think that the person in this situation who's being unreasonable is Dany. I feel like she still doesn't really understand that none of this matters right now. The only thing that matters are the White Walkers are approaching Winterfell as they speak, but all that Dany cares about is controlling the Seven Kingdoms, which I think is a little bit ridiculous. And Sansa too seemed a little bit like she was caught up in the, politics of everything that's going on. But this was such an amazing scene and such an important scene, and I think it's just a testament to the acting of these two amazing women.
The tension in the room was very palpable.
Yeah, it was very intense, and I think they were both happy to be interrupted towards the end of their conversation. So let's talk a little bit about Bran's role in this episode.
Right, so in the war room, I guess, Jon is talking strategy, and Bran has a plan, which is to use himself as bait. And what's really interesting about this part is that he reveals a lot about the history between the Night King and the Three-Eyed Raven, and he also reveals the Night King's overall motivation, which is just basically annihilation of humankind. The Night King has gone after the Three-Eyed Raven many times before, we learn, because he wants to destroy human memory, which is, I guess, the ultimate sort of destruction of humankind.
Okay, my question is, if Bran knows the motivations of the Night King and what he's going to be doing, then why doesn't he know how this is going to turn out and what's their best strategy? I
think he can see all of human memory, but I think he only gets flashes of the future.
Yeah. Okay, that kind of makes sense.
That's why I think when he says to Jaime, how do you know there's going to be anything afterwards? I don't think that Bran really knows if there's going to be anything afterwards or not.
Yeah, I think there's some...
I hope not, because if he does, then that comment is extremely ominous.
Yeah, I think there's limitations to the all-seeing aspect of his gifts. One of the most amazing moments in this episode, I think, happens when everybody's sort of getting ready for what could be their final night on Earth, right? And they're all sitting around the fire, and something really amazing happens. Brienne is finally knighted. For the entirety of this series that we've known Brienne has always wanted to be a knight. And I think that this was such an emotional and impactful moment, especially to be knighted by someone like Jaime, who she really respects, who she's come to love as a friend. So this was like, it was so emotional.
It was a fantastic scene to an extent. It potentially closed the whole Jaime and Brienne arc. I also really appreciated story time with Tormund, where Tormund tells his weird story. And I think that Tormund's story time should be the next Game of Thrones spin-off. I just want to hear him tell funny stories. Having said that, of course, his story about being raised for a time by a giantess may not be true. He also said that he got it on with a bear, and I think we can all be hopefully skeptical of that story also.
Yeah, and Tormund's kind of tale of suckling at the teat of a giant was not the only uncomfortable moment in this episode.
True that.
Aria and Gendry, you know, get it on.
It happened. A lot of people found that uncomfortable. Some people said it was a little out of character for her to be so aggressive in that situation. I think it did feel a little off. However, I think she was acting that way because she has real feelings for Gendry, and she's not really sure how to express them. I mean, she does peel people's faces off for a living now, I guess. So, you know, maybe she has problems putting her feelings out there.
Yeah, I think this is sort of a contentious scene among Game of Thrones fans, because Arya has, up until this point, been sort of, I wouldn't say asexual, but kind of someone who doesn't really have sexual desires. So yes, it did seem sort of out of character, but it's her last night on Earth. She wants to experience life. So I really don't see it as that weird of a scene. I loved when she took off her shirt and you could see the scars that she had from when the waif attacked her. I thought it was just kind of like a very powerful moment for Arya.
And marks the union, finally, of the Stark and Baratheon houses.
Yeah.
We'll see for how long. So let's also talk about Podrick. The new and improved badass Season 8 Podrick. He can sing, he can fight, who knows what else. Wait,
I think we know what else.
So he sang a song called Jenny's Song, which has been alluded to in the books. Jenny's Song is about a woman called Jenny of Oldstones who married Duncan Targaryen, a prince who broke off his betrothal to a Baratheon daughter for love. He also gave up his claim to the throne. And one of Jenny's friends, a woods witch, was the one who prophesied that the prince who was promised would come from Daenerys' parents and Jon's grandparents. So it was interesting that after that song, we then cut to Jon and Daenerys in the crypts with the statue of Lyanna, because basically that song, or at least the story behind that song, sums up all the different elements in the plot of the Game of Thrones. You have, you know, broken betrothal or marriage. You have the theme of giving up the throne for love, which is also the question that's hanging over Jon and Daenerys' heads right now. You have a Baratheon rebellion.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting.
Yeah, I felt like that song had such a Lord of the Rings vibe.
Yeah, it was very
Pippinish. I really, really enjoyed it. Now, going back to Jon and Dany. So this scene where he finally reveals his true parentage to her, there is a bit of a negative reaction, which, I mean, we've all come to expect from Daenerys. She's kind of become a little bit of a villain in the series in the first 2 episodes. What do you think is going to happen between them?
So, I mean, I thought Daenerys' reaction was completely in character, don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
but I did think it was funny that her reaction isn't, ew, incest. It's instead, stay away from my chair.
Yeah, I definitely think that Daenerys has really shown her true colors. She's very cold to Jon when she finds out. And I don't know what she would have done had they not blown the horns. The White Walkers
Jon saved
are
by
arriving.
the horn just in time.
Saved by the horn.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like this is definitely not over between them, despite what's going to happen in the battle
It's
to come.
an interesting question. Will they be able to put it aside for the duration of the battle and pick it up afterwards, or is it going to interfere with their defense of Winterfell?
Yeah. Now, speaking of the Battle of Winterfell, the White Walkers have finally arrived. Now, we asked the question to our community, what is going to happen in the Battle of Winterfell? Now, I think an overwhelming amount of people agree that the Battle of Winterfell will be lost and that they will be forced to flee. However, an interesting amount of people are also sort of pointing towards the fact that Daenerys is becoming the villain of this season. Now, what do you think of that?
I think she's going to pull it together for the Battle of Winterfell, and after that, all bets are off. We'll see.
Yeah, well, I guess we will see in the episodes to come. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll be here next week doing a breakdown of Game of Thrones, Season 8, Episode 3, The Battle of Winterfell. Thank you so much. Bye.